Hi, I'm Chris.
Hi, I'm Joseph Tingley. Welcome to the National WWII Museum.
Oh, this place is amazing. Thanks for having me. So tell me a little bit about the museum.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were founded in 2000 as the National D-Day Museum. We actually opened on June 6th.
D-Day.
Yep, D-Day. So we opened up as the National D-Day Museum. As you may have can probably tell, we've expanded a little bit since then to cover not just D-Day, but all of World War II.
So why is it that the World War II Museum is here in New Orleans?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get that one quite a bit from visitors. The reason is on D-Day, one of the very important pieces of military equipment that was used were landing craft like this one here, right behind us. And these were built by Higgins Industries, which was based right here in New Orleans. So they thought no better place to honor the legacy of Andrew Higgins than having the National D-Day Museum here in New Orleans.
Dwight D. Eisenhower, the general in charge of the invasion, said that Higgins is the man who won the war for us.
Yeah, and that's high praise coming from General Eisenhower.
Wow. Well, can we take a look around?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
Thanks. I'm sitting with Cyril Nelson. He's a veteran who served in the Army Air Corps. And as a volunteer, he sits in the lobby of the World War II Museum and shares his stories. Cyril, thanks for talking with us for just a minute.
That's fine.
So why do you come here? Why do you share your stories with visitors?
Well, I think that one of the things that I hear is that in the school system, they kind of just gloss over World War II. And
Yeah.
of course, I think it's the one that really counted.
It sure did. You guys saved the world, you know?
Since it was, unlike the First World War, it was a world war because there was one on this side, one on this side. And we were in both of them.
Yeah.
A war affects the economy greatly because it takes people out of unemployment and it creates jobs for those who stay.
Yeah.
I learned that in school.
What's it like when a family comes in here, they've got young kids, and maybe they've never met a World War II veteran before, and you have that?
Well, sometimes they like it, and sometimes they just brush it off.
Yeah.
So you just react to whatever they do. And sometimes I try to ask them if they want to know anything, if I can tell them anything. Sometimes they say, well, I don't know what to ask or whatever. So I don't know. It's relating to people. I come here because I'm old, because if I wasn't here, I'd be sitting home looking at four walls. And we are a gregarious animal. We have to have some fraternization. I'm trying to teach that to my 71-year-old son because he only gets fraternization if he gets out and goes to the bar.
Yeah.
So at home, he never talks to me.
Now, you mentioned that you're one of a dying breed, to talk
That's
about.
right.
Tell me about that. What's that like?
Well, you don't think a whole lot about it because there's no point in it. To me, there's no point in it because even though we know that there are fewer of us every day, someday it'll be me. We all go sometime. It's just a matter of when. That's why after my wife died, I never got even close to marrying again.
Yeah.
Because after all, it was Nanny when she died.
Yeah.
So, give you a philosophy lesson. I've got all this out.
What is it you like about the museum? You spend a lot of time here.
Well, I only come here once a week.
That's more than I
But-
come.
on, you're not from World War II.
I'm not from around here, am I?
Well, I'm not World War II either. If I can talk to people here and they enjoy it, I enjoy it too.
Yeah.
I enjoy it more. Even though I don't have any drastic stories to tell about the war, I tell one story that I really shouldn't at all because I don't particularly like the guy anymore. And he's still alive, I think. But we had a pilot that got his plane damaged, and the P-51 will fly a little bit after it's damaged, not far. Well, he managed to head it towards Spain, and I don't know whether he flipped it over and fell out or what, but he got out of it and got into Spain, managed to get on the boat and come back to England. And you're doing like you might have heard the story before.
No.
He came back to England, and normally when you do that, they send you home. That's the routine, they send you home. He decided he didn't want to go home.
Mm-hmm.
So he went to Ike, said, I want to stay here and finish my tour with these guys I came over with. And he managed to do it.
Yeah.
So then he stayed in the service after that. So being a pilot and a kind of a guy he is, he managed to get further up the ladder.
Yeah.
So he did all right. But that's the only.
So a lot of our, most of the folks who are watching are high school and middle school students. What would you say to them about how important it is to learn history?
Supposedly, when you learn history, or what is supposed to happen, you learn what causes such things as World War II, and you try to not have that happen again. And after they dropped the bombs, the two bombs, for some reason, I thought that the world should have learned that with that kind of ammunition, with that kind of a thing going on, a war is useless because you can destroy civilization. But that's gone over for an awful lot of people's heads. Because we've still had a lot of that going on. And unfortunately, we've had too many in our own country here. And that's another thing that bothers me, is that even though our leaders are supposedly intelligent, civil-minded people, they still want to send the young people to war. And it's easily done, and sometimes, now these are my thoughts.
Sure.
You can use them or not. We get into wars because without trying to get into a war, we supply ammunition or other things for people who are in the war.
Uh-huh.
But they're supposed to have to be taught how to use this stuff. When they do, some of them get killed. And that's when we get into war. We're going to go save them or retaliate for that loss. They shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Right. So just one last question for you. People call your generation the greatest generation. Do you feel like the greatest generation?
I don't know what to say to that. Because, well, when I think of what I have gone through, I grew up during the Depression, the so-called Great Depression. And I think this is why Tom Brokaw did that. We went from that directly to World War II. We managed to survive that. And then we started getting more educated after that. So that's how that, I think, come about. And in one sense, you could call us that, but I don't know what else would make us a Great Depression, a great generation.
Survived a lot more than most of us have to. Cyril, thanks for your time today. I appreciate it.
You're quite welcome.
Privilege. So America wasn't really ready for the war, was it?
Not particularly, no. We had a very, very small standing army during peacetime, so we did not really have the resources to fight a global war that we were about to be called upon to.
So what happened? What did it take for us to mobilize?
It took a lot, and really it was a lot of American manufacturers kind of stepping up and transitioning from what they made during peacetime and transitioning into what can we make to support the war effort. So
instead of making typewriters, we're making carbines.
Yep. Instead of making piston pumps for pesticides, we're making landing craft. So some very, very big leaps in some cases on what they were actually manufacturing.
So that must have made a huge industrial mobilization. Guys just like me having to go to work, welding together new Jeeps.
Now don't miss a spot.
Okay, oh wow, all right. I love the interactivity that the museum offers to help us submerge ourselves in this story.
Yeah, it kind of makes it come to life, absolutely.
So now this wasn't just guys going off to war when the time came. This was women going into the workforce to fill a lot of those jobs.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that dynamic, because it's a huge, huge step for women.
Yeah, it's one of the first times that women are entering the workforce in great numbers. The United States, they have to supply soldiers to fight this war. So who's going to be left to manufacture the tools that these soldiers are going to need when they go overseas? So they see putting women into factories as a way of freeing up men to go overseas in the military and fight.
So we see images like Rosie the Riveter, You Can Do It. And how important was that for American society? Because that must have been a pretty big change.
It was a very big change, absolutely, and it's going to change a lot about the fabric of American society. That being said, after the war, for the most part, most women are going to kind of be pushed back into more traditional roles, unfortunately.
So as America undergoes this metamorphosis, this mobilization, what does the spirit of America feel like at that time?
Basically, the war, everything is about the war at this point. Everything from the newspaper stories on the front page every morning to the work you're doing in the factories to rationing at home. So the war is very much with the American people at every turn.
Now you say rationing, so it's not like I can have unlimited bowls of cereal for breakfast.
For instance, if your car broke down in 1941, mechanic says it's totaled, we can't repair it, you're probably not going to be able to get a new car until the end of the war, because there is actually a moratorium on the production of civilian vehicles because the need is so great for the military.
Where if my tire blows, I'm not going to go get a new tire.
Might be a lot harder to get that because, again, rubber is going to be something that's rationed quite a bit.
So this is something then that really affects every household in America.
Yep, and there are going to be cookbooks that are written during this time that are how to use your sugar ration to get the most out of your sugar ration. So The war is going to be part of pretty much every part of the American experience.
As we stand here in front of this wall, and I'm seeing a lot of math happening here, a lot of zeros and commas, which mean big numbers.
Yeah.
And this really speaks to the impact that this war has on every human being in America.
Absolutely. The sheer amount of materiel that is produced by the United States during this time it's just difficult to fathom. Like, some of these numbers are so large that you really can't even wrap your mind around how much of this was produced.
Wow. Well, let's take a look at more of the museum and see how things look on the front lines.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Joe, outside the museum, there are pieces of the Atlantic Wall, and now we're inside the recreation of one. What is it the museum's trying to help us understand?
Yeah, I think so often we think of the experience on D-Day from kind of exclusively from the American perspective. So in this space here, you're kind of seeing it from a little bit of a different perspective, from the Germans. So behind us here, you can see what they would have seen on the morning of June 6th. Kind of just stormy seas, and eventually thousands of ships of the Armada that is going to be launching D-Day are going to come into view slowly.
There's an exhibit elsewhere in the museum that shows those thousands of ships laid out. It is an awe-inspiring sight. I can only imagine what it must have been like to be on the ground around the sea at that moment.
And knowing that it is your job to stop them from landing, or at least try.
Wow. Now, D-Day obviously is one of the most famous events of World War II, and it's probably the event that most Americans know best. We know it through the works of Stephen Ambrose, for instance, and it ties directly into the story here in New Orleans and the Higgins manufacturing. Tell me a little bit about that. How does that all come together for you?
Yeah, for me, I think that D-Day is the beginning of that road to Berlin. It's actually part of the much larger campaign. People forget that before D-Day, the Americans are fighting in North Africa and Italy. So this is kind of part of that campaign. And again, this is kind of that culmination of everything that's been learned in those previous campaigns. And of course, the Higgins boats are going to be instrumental on D-Day. Without these shallow draft landing craft that could come ashore and drop those troops right on the beach, most of the amphibious invasions of World War II would not have been possible.
So what's at stake in this moment with this invasion?
Well, to give you an idea, General Eisenhower actually writes essentially what is his resignation speech as the Allied commander and tucks it in his pocket just in case. He takes full responsibility because this is a gamble. Today we know D-Day is successful and the Allies win the war, but this was still a big roll of the dice. This was the largest invasion of the war up until that point. So this was a big gamble.
Is it quite all or nothing at this point?
I mean, pretty much, yeah. If the invasion is unsuccessful, then the American military might be in the similar situation to England, where we're not really ready to try another invasion for some time because we have to rebuild. Because as you can imagine, if you don't secure this beach, most of these guys who are landing are probably not going to get off that beach.
I see behind us cloudy skies, and when you talk about what's at stake, the weather was poor, the situation was murky, people didn't land where they were supposed to, some of the airdrops didn't go well. So that's a really terrible set of complications right off the bat.
Absolutely, and it really speaks to the strength of the plan that so much went wrong on D-Day, but it was still a successful military operation.
So what actually happens when the Allies land?
When the Allies come ashore, especially at Omaha Beach, there is going to be a lot of resistance. Again, pretty much everything that can go wrong does, but they are able to get off that beach and able to open up those corridors to move further inland.
And that was key, get in past the line and you get a little breathing space.
The invasion at Normandy is essentially gaining a foothold for the rest of the invasion of Europe. This is just step one in that road to Berlin.
So now we talk a little bit about the paratroopers that were involved to kind of soften things up behind the lines. Things don't go quite so well. Yeah. We know a lot of that story because of Stephen Ambrose and the Band of Brothers. Tell me a little bit about how that action ties into what's going on the beach.
Yeah, so the paratroopers are dropped hours before the invasion here on the beaches, right behind us here. But they are essentially, their goal is to kind of secure positions called causeways, so basically roads and avenues off of the beaches so that those infantry, once they've secured the beaches, can actually move inland. Without the paratroopers securing those vital avenues inland, the invasion would not have been possible.
And how important is Stephen Ambrose? People must come into the museum and say like, oh, I read this book, now I'm here. Tell me how important that connection is.
I think it's very, very important for our museum. Stephen Ambrose is one of our founders here. So yeah, it's a very, very important part and important part of what we do here. And honestly, Band of Brothers is, for many people, it's the source that they come into this museum with. So it's a very, very important work for us to understand, not only because it is such a great work and it was written by one of our founders, but because that is where a lot of our visitors are getting, what's getting them into World War II sometimes to begin with is works like Band of Brothers.
So we've secured the beaches and now it's time to secure the road to Berlin. Should we go there?
I think so, yeah.
All right, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah, right in there. Really shows you the whole scale, though, of how much of a Allied effort it really was. So,
look how immersive this is.
Yeah, and I didn't realize until recently, but this is actually, most of the components of this are an original World War II glider. Some of the like fabric and the wings and the part that's smashed is obviously
They just came in and then they would just roll the Jeep right out?
Yep. Gives you an idea of not only the number of ships involved, but the different types of ships. You've got everything from ships that are bringing in tanks, cargo trucks, supplies, troops, but then you've got the tiny little Higgins boat that is going to be landing everything for the most part.
Just the whole array.
Yeah. So you can see some of the B-17s, but also the C-47s there that were dropping the paratroopers.
Here's the star of the show right there, the Higgins boat.
Yep, right there.
And what's the difference between those and kind of the one with the little tower?
Yeah, so there were differing sizes of boats. Ones that were bringing in infantry and then ones that were also bringing in things like vehicles, tanks. You also have amphibious tanks being used on D-Day, but the surf ends up being a little too rough and most of them actually end up sinking before they ever make it to shore.
Wow, this is like just coming off the boat.
Yep. So this is what a lot of these guys would have seen, and you know, you can already kind of see some of the carnage already on the beaches. Like this looks like somebody trying to run up there, and so I always love these types of photos. You can pick out all those little details. So,
and of course, it ties right into the story of the Higgins boat here.
Of course, yeah, which is, you know, Andrew Higgins is our patron saint here.
So are these actual photos from the different beaches?
They are, yep. So a lot of really powerful images in here. This is one of my favorites here because to this day, they actually do not know the identity of that soldier, whether he made it or not. So, you know, if you think about it, that could be the very last photo of him ever taken, and we'll never know, unfortunately, because there were just so many guys on the beach that how are you gonna, with a blurry photograph, figure out who it was, so.
My grandfather came in through Omaha. It's just stunning.
So here you can see just troops streaming ashore. This Higgins boat is probably heading out to pick up a whole nother batch of soldiers to bring on board, bring to shore. So,
and this is sort of where I see my grandfather coming ashore. He was on D2.
Yeah.
And you know, as part of the guys that are coming in afterwards, you know, it could be him.
Yeah. Absolutely. We've had people who have been walking through galleries and said, oh my God, that's my grandfather.
I see this exhibit honors Amos M. Hanks. Any connection to Tom?
I believe so, yeah. Tom Hanks is another kind of patron saint of our museum, so to speak. He was here when we opened on June 6, 2000. He's made some trips back since for different openings and stuff like that. So, you know, of course, with Stephen Ambrose and Band of Brothers, that connection, yeah, he's pretty big here for us. So,
I just want to ask real quick. Yeah. So the hedgerows of France.
Yes.
And I can see a couple rifle barrels sticking out, but I think we forget how impenetrable these hedgerows were. And what was it like to be in the hedgerow country?
Oh yeah. soldiers who are in that doing the fighting there, that from what's called the breakout from Normandy, which D-Day is obviously a success, but it takes a while to clear Normandy, partly because of these hedgerows. They divide up the fields like we would use kind of low stone walls here in these States, but they use these big hedgerows that have been growing sometimes for, decades, if not centuries. So they're very hard to get through. They actually, American GIs actually end up putting makeshift bulldozers on the fronts of their tanks just to get through these. And a lot of these soldiers talk about how, like we have with the barrels coming out here, you could be advancing through a field and have no idea somebody was in that hedgerow because they were so thick and they almost blocked out sound too from neighboring fields. So for a while, a lot of GIs were saying that we were measuring progress by how many fields we took. It wasn't miles, wasn't yards, it was how many fields we could take in a day.
Every set of brush is a new ambush
Yep.
waiting to happen.
New place of concealment for the enemy, absolutely.
So we have arrived at a sign that says Germany surrenders.
Yep.
Our road to this spot was a lot easier than the Allies. How long does it take the Allies to get from D-Day to this point?
Yeah, it's going to take them until 1945, so almost about a year to get to that point. And remember, this D-Day is just the invasion of mainland Europe. The U.S. has been fighting since 1942, North Africa, and in Italy as well. So.
And we haven't even talked about the war in Japan. We haven't talked about the Russian front in Eastern Europe. I mean, so they're truly a world war.
Absolutely, and one of the reasons that we are able to push the Germans back is that the Germans are fighting a two-front war at this point. They're also fighting the Russians. So they're kind of being squeezed from two sides. That's going to be vital for why D-Day is successful and why the invasion of Europe is successful ultimately.
Tell me about the global nature of this conflict before we even get in.
Yeah, before we even enter the war, China is being invaded by the Japanese. They're kind of expanding their empire in the Pacific. So there's a lot going on. You have the Soviet Union, Hitler turning on the Soviet Union. They're initially an ally of Nazi Germany's, but eventually Hitler invades Russia. So this is really a war that kind of touches every corner. Even China, Burma, and India, you have fighting in all of these areas.
And this gallery here sort of captures Tunisia and North Africa.
Yep, absolutely. And that's one of the really nice things about our galleries is not only do we have the items that tell stories and the artifacts that tell these stories, but we also have the environments as well. And that's going to be a huge part of especially the North African campaign.
As the Allies fought their way across Europe, I just see this destruction. What was the impact on Europe itself?
I mean, Europe is going to take years really to recover from all of this. One of the very common tactics that's used in Europe is concentrated bombing. So entire cities in some cases are pretty much flattened. Obviously, this is going to create thousands upon thousands of refugees. And it's going to take a long time for Europe to kind of bounce back from this. And that's one of the things that the United States does help with is the rebuilding of Europe with things like the Marshall Plan.
Kurt Vonnegut wrote about the destruction of Dresden, Germany specifically, but it's a larger metaphor for the destruction that takes place. Can you speak to that at all?
What you see in Slaughterhouse 5 is very similar to the scenes that you're seeing all over Europe, not just in Germany, but also in France and in Belgium and, of course, the Soviet Union as well. They bear the brunt of a lot of the early campaigns of the war. So there's going to be a lot of destruction and a lot of work to be done to rebuild Europe.
And, of course, Vonnegut really wrestled with the senselessness of it and just the apparent randomness.
Yeah, and that's something that civilians are going to learn and that soldiers on the front lines are going to learn is that in war, a lot of times the difference between life and death comes down to where you're standing. A couple more feet to the right, you might be safe. A couple feet to the left, you might not be.
How do you recover from something like this?
It's going to take all of these soldiers and civilians probably decades really to recover. The men who begin the road to Berlin, who start that road to Berlin in North Africa, they're gone by this point. These men are basically different people because of the experiences that they've gone through here in Europe.
Yeah, and these guys all have to come home and then just pretend like nothing happened and go back into their daily lives.
Yep. Put their lives back together as best they can and try to move on.
We've seen a lot of challenging, difficult things in this museum today. What does the museum do to help teachers grapple with those issues in a classroom?
Yeah, so we understand that teaching a lot of the issues related to the Second World War is difficult for teachers in many ways that bring those topics to the classroom. So we do a lot with teachers to kind of give them a toolkit. We do professional development here at the museum and also abroad. Where we help teachers to kind of address some of these very heavy topics. We also produce our own curriculum guides that teachers can utilize in the classroom to help them with these conversations. And also some of our virtual field trips as well that kind of help teachers to bring this all together in a way that is beneficial for their students.
Now here's a guy I like. We're standing with Dwight D. Eisenhower, eventual two-term president, but he is the general who led the liberation of Europe for the Allies. Now, aside from a general, we can actually follow our way through the museum in the footsteps of a soldier, an individual enlisted man, through your dog tag program. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. So the way our dog tag program works is when folks arrive at the museum, they can pick up one of these cards right when they first purchase their ticket. And they scan it at a kiosk, and they will pick a soldier to follow through the rest of the museum. There are then kiosks spread throughout the exhibits and throughout the museum campus that allow you to just touch it and learn a little bit more about what the person that you are following did in that particular area of the war.
Now, we have only been able to scratch the surface of an entire museum complex that is incredible. There's no other word for it. Why would you want folks to come here and experience this for themselves?
I think our museum does a really great job of really bringing the events of World War II to life, not only looking at the big picture, the large armies moving across Europe and the island hopping in the Pacific, but it really focuses in and gives you those personal stories, the stories of the average infantryman, the average soldier, the average sailor, who really is the reason that the Allies were able to secure victory. So that, I think, more than anything, is what we bring to the table here at the National World War II Museum.
They did no less than save the world.
Absolutely.
Joe, you've been wonderful. Thanks so much for spending time with us today.
My pleasure.